store. My dad used to say that that was the first store, that was his first job. He used to deliver groceries for Gormley's. Wow. My mother was a student at Loretto Academy, and her father owned property by what is now the PERA, and it was adjacent to the St. Michael's football stadium. But anyway, he said that he had an order to deliver to my grandparents, and there he met my mother and fell in love with her. And so they ended up living in his family compound here on Canyon Road. One of the things that I remember about growing up on Canyon Road was we were so fortunate because we had family, we had grandparents, uncles, aunts, neighbors. It was all people that we knew. And even if they were not related to us, we were always addressing them as my tío, my tía, mi prima, mi primo. And so we knew a lot of them. And across the street was where Virginia's grandfather used to have some stables. And I'm going to pass this around after a while, but anyway, they used to have a riding academy. That was one of them. And I do have a picture of myself on one of the horses with the name of the riding academy. And of course, that place became very popular. It was many different things that maybe some of you might remember. At one time, they used to sell vigas. Then it also was, I believe, where they used to do glass and glass blowing. And then right across on the corner of Palace and on the corner of Palace and Canyon Road with one of my aunts. And as I was growing up, that's where the Guadalupe Credit Union first started. And it started with Father McCarthy. And I remember that he was very good at recruiting people. He had our parents all enroll us for 50 cents. And so I think to this date, I'm probably one of the oldest members of the Guadalupe Credit Union. Later on, Virginia's dad took over the Guadalupe Credit Union, which ended up on Cristo Rey, and I believe that's where he retired. Many of the names that I remember on Canyon Road, of course, Rodriguez, Abejas, the Vigils. The Vigils were all over. There were also Vacas, Moyas, and there were several other names, but mostly the families were all Hispanic families at that time. I also remember when they started building the Cristo Rey Church. It was quite a neighborhood project. I remember my father and the men in the neighborhood volunteering to make adobes. And the women would always get together and cook and take them their meals, which usually consisted of beans, chilies, fresh tortillas, and so forth. When it was completed, it really became the center for everybody here on Canyon Road. And one of my most vivid memories of Cristo Rey was when Monsignor Smith, Patrick Smith, was assigned to Cristo Rey. He was really a progressive priest. He used to broadcast Spanish music from his office in Cristo Rey. I don't know if you all remember. Do you remember that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so he did that. And many of our youth lived in Upper Cerro Gordo, Apodaca Hill, Upper Canyon Road, and some of our kids used to get into trouble. So what he did was he initiated a drive to build the Cristo Rey Center. And I remember going there with many of the kids to roller skate, to dance. I don't know if you remember other activities that would go on there, weddings, movies. They used to have movies for 10 cents. And it was quite a center. Later on, he also initiated the building a Christorate school, and many of the children went there. There was also Manderfield School, which now, as you know, is being turned over as condos, I believe. But I, again, like I said, can't help but think of other streets that lead into Canyon Road, Camino Cabra, San Acacio. And one of the things that, and I believe maybe your primo here probably was one of them, the young men used to always, we didn't have swimming pools, but the young men used to dam the Santa Fe River in a Seta Madre. Did you do that? And they used to go swimming there, and many of yeah, skinny big thing, he says. Okay. But one of the things that I remember having witnessed is that they used to play Tarzan and try to run into the river. And I should stop my story because I'm taking too long, but I do need to say one other thing real quick. I remember that the Santa Fe River used to bring a lot of water, and so did the Seta Madre. And they used to use the water from the rivers to irrigate their gardens. I know my parents had a garden, they had the fruit trees, and they used to have their little matanzas and so forth. But this one time, I remember very clearly that the river was very flooded. And there was a gentleman, or well, I don't know who it was, I was still a young kid, but his car ran into the river, and they had to get a rescue team to try to pull him out. And one of my uncles, Rosendo Salazar, was one of the ones that was helping pulling him out. But anyway, I could go on and on, but anyway, I'm going to pass this on to my friend here who I used to run into her at Acequia Madre, and we'd walk to school to Wood Gormley and Harrington and then high school.
Well, I think Socorro has said most of everything.
I hope not.
Now I can help you that part.
Yeah.
Now, I did live on Acequia, Josiah Lane's named after my dad. And of course, we did do a lot here on Canyon Road. I remember going to Gormley's store, which I love going to. And when they put the trees out during Christmas, my brother and I'd go and see which tree we were going to pick. I remember going to Roy Ball's store, that was Paul Roy Ball's, which later became Claude's, and then it really became fun. Yeah, a lot of fun went on at Claude's. Then there was Persianos, which was, farther down the road. And we walked, and I remember Lázaro, the barber shop. My brother used to come get haircuts here, and I'd walk with him. And I envied him, because there was one chair, he'd sit on this high chair, and I thought, damn, why couldn't I get a haircut? Besides Lázaro's, oh gosh, there was on the corner, on the end of, well, by Canyon Road and Delgado Street, there was a dance studio, Marie Wilson. And my sister used to take tap dancing with her, and I'd go watch them and kind of hope that someday I could be a good dancer, but I don't want to be a tap dancer, I want to be a ballerina. Of course, I never made either. Going to a Gormley store was fun, because they used to have their dolls. They sold about everything. It was like a mercantile store, wasn't it? And Roy Ball's was also wonderful. I also remember you people. There was Socorro, the Moya, the Salazars, the Sanchez's. God, we were all a big familia. The whole neighborhood. And we did get along beautifully. We went Santa Fe High and all. And when you talked about damming the Santa Fe River, well, later I lived on Upper Canyon Road, and they did dam that. The boys from Socorro would come, Carlos Martinez, and they filled bags with sand and made that river to where it was 4 feet deep. Believe it or not, that was just as you go down to Cerro Gordo. I learned to swim, and of course, we had a home on Upper Canyon. My dad did build us a little swimming pool, you know, like 2 feet that we play in and all. But later I did learn to swim, so when I joined the Navy, I was immediately put into intermediate class because I could swim. And people said, well, where did you learn to swim in Santa Fe? I said, Santa Fe River. That's where I learned to swim. Then, most of my time in the Navy had to do with swimming. My later tests were taken down in Pearl Harbor and all, but Santa Fe River was my start. I remember all of us going to Santa Fe High, Harrington. We didn't have a Seika school then, but we'd walk home from lunch from Harrington, Gormley, or Wood Gormley. We'd run home and walk back. It was either one way. One way we'd walk, one way we'd run.
And that was Santa Fe High too.
Yeah. And then if it snowed, Mother would let us eat at school, and there was a little lady that had the little candy store there, Della. And she used to sell hamburgers. Oh, God, I'd keep saying, boy, if it snows, I could get a hamburger at Della's. That was the treat. But other than that, there wasn't, you know, well, going to Cristo Rey Church, we'd walk it. And after church, I remember midnight mass. We couldn't eat meat before Christmas Eve, but Mother made the best empanaditas and all. And after midnight mass, we go home and we could have our empanaditas. And they let us children have coffee, which was mostly milk with a little coffee. But when we lived on Upper Canyon, there were the Gonzalez family, and the folks would stop and visit with them. And you know, they liked making their wine. And they give us kids a little shot glass of their cherry wine or whatever. Boy, to me, that was the best thing. I liked that because we could have coffee and wine. Which, so they kind of got me started so I'd be ready for clubs later.
How do I match this? I'm just going to take a few minutes because I'll pick up from the 1950s on, because I grew up on Canyon Road at that time, and sort of tell you a few of my stories. But I really want to start by recognizing Mariana and Eddie and Tyler and Connie as children who are my second cousins, because he's my first cousin. And yeah, it's really hard to talk about Canyon Road without the name V Hill, because from where Percy Ortiz, Valentina, was V Hill, all the way up to Patrick Smith Park, interspersed were V Hill family. And so, you know, who'd known when I grew up here that one of my claims to fame is that my family didn't sell our property, because many people did, and that happened quite a bit in the 50s. And I think one of the warmest things I remember about being here is the neighborhood feeling, and it was Socorro, and my mother, and Celine, and my mother, and I remember, and Dora, your mother. I remember the coffee exchanges going back. My mother would say, ya voy a hablar con la Celina, or Socorro, or voy a ver la Dora. And so they exchanged coffee regularly. It was a very neighborly thing, and visited. It was a very warm feeling to see that happen. And I actually remember the Canyon Road Bar here, Franke, and the story, we've heard about it. But you know, we did have alcoholics then. We didn't label them, because it was more of a community feeling. Those that got drunk and passed by the houses got fed by our families, got coffee before they got home. It was a really strong feeling of taking care of each other. And that growing up with that was really phenomenal for me. But I want to tell you about the diversity, real quick, that I experienced coming up. Right across the street from us was Tommy Massione. He leased for my aunt and uncle. Tommy Massione was this extraordinary artist. Many of you know the name. And I do remember when my mother would always invite people over for Thanksgiving. And when I was a little girl, probably 7 years old, was the first time I met Tommy Massione. And he sat at our Thanksgiving dinner, and he was bigger than life. And when he spoke, he, you know, I mean, literally would wipe by you, and I would sit back, like, and his hair was right here. So I was actually kind of frightened of him until I met Odin Hollenkleimer, who was his next door neighbor, leased from my aunt as well. And Odin Hollenkleimer had this German accent that I went, Mom, what does that mean? You know, I couldn't understand him. These are famous artists that started settling here on Canyon Road. And at the time, I didn't know they were famous artists. I just thought, my goodness, who are these lively people that are, you know, creating this excitement in our life? Also, Christ Ray School. Those of us who were here went to Christ Ray School, and that was my first taste of diversity in kindergarten, because Sister Melissa called me Virginia. We were taught by Bostonian nuns, so talk about a huge diversity. And so I used to spell my name with an R in kindergarten at the end, and Sister Melissa would say, Virginia, there's no R, then I'm Virginia at the end, and I said, hey, sister, I won't say it. Really, most of us who first started at Christ Ray came out of school with Boston accents to a great extent. But after that, and I think a lot of what happened to Canyon Road has been mentioned, the diversity that happened here had a lot to do with the kind of neighborhood feeling we had, the welcoming, you know, you're welcome here, come and have, you know, coffee, come and have Thanksgiving dinner with us. We had very many across the street from us. Ehrlichman rented for a long time from the Watergapers, and after all that happened, he leased the property right across the street from us as well. So there were quite a few famous people that lived here in Canyon Road at the time when we were growing up. Of course, we didn't know they're famous, neither did they know. I'm sure Tommy Massione didn't think that there would be a statue, a bronze statue erected for him on Hillside Avenue. But so I think for me, I experienced the diversity when the arts community started coming in more and more, and when many of the residents here moved to Casa Solana or Dale Bellama too, which I wanted to do because you could ride a bike there and it was flat. You wouldn't have to climb Montesol, and I always thought, boy, we need to live somewhere where I don't have to climb with my bike. So I'm grateful to my parents for maintaining their ethic of keeping property in the family. It's paid off quite a bit for those of us who still have a real strong association to Canyon Road and are able to say, that's where I grew up. And you know, the stables that are there next to the tea house all had horses when I grew up, and I didn't realize they had an academy. You learn something every day. Yeah, those are some of the memories that I had. There's many more, but I thought that might be a little different from what you've heard so far. So thank you all.
I think this is a good time to ask questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. I mean, one of the conversations I had with Mr. McHill when I visited him was he remembered the agriculture here, that there were cornfields and
I recall hearing, you can verify or not, that Gormley's was once a large chili wholesaler. Or maybe it was Piñon. Maybe it was Piñon. Maybe it was Piñon. Maybe it was Piñon, I guess. Okay. Yeah, there was big part. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
How many people needed to live though? How many people in this room lived on Canyon Road? Raise your hand. I lived at 1107, the two-story building that you were talking about.
I rented from Rudy.
Question for you. How do you feel about Canyon Road now?
Good question. Well, I guess since I'm one of the property owners, we're leasing all our property, everything moves really well. It has, for me, probably the depth of what I feel for Canyon Road has more to do with memories. And so I will never let those go. So Canyon Road, despite all of the different faces and changes here, has so many heartfelt memories for me, and that always is the way I feel about Canyon Road. It's difficult because now we have to deal with the city when it comes to code compliance, and the rock wall that's by the tea house that our you probably even helped build was really just built as a retainer wall. Now, because of all the trucks and trafficking that goes down, that wall is buckling, and so I'm having to work with the city with regard to that. So I feel like it's brought a lot more work than I ever expected it to, but I hold on to the memories.
Just to hitchhike on Socorro's thing with a swimming pool, and I went to the Navy too, and I almost didn't get out of boot camp because I couldn't swim. But I was trying to get. We actually, though my parents. Just after the war, we came back to Canyon Road, but we lived on west of Vargas. And by the time, remember Chinatown?
Yes.
Well, they'd have most of the water, and by the time it got down to the Vargas Street, we had maybe 2 feet. And but down the way on Alto Street, it was the Lucianitos. Yeah. And they'd come and break our dam, and so they could get water. And I remember at one time, they even threw glass in our water. And my little brother one time cut off a toe. I went home with him crying. So there was a battle for that. Even back then, we were fighting for water.
Pretty dirty.
Well, I think that the roots here on Canyon Road, for those of us that lived, are pretty deep. But I have to share with what Virginia said. The memories are what are really important. A lot of the people ended up selling